I'm here in a suburb of Omaha, Nebraska. It is cold and it's wet and it's misty. And yet here stands one of the most majestic monuments I've ever seen, a tribute to the Latter-day Saint pioneers that came here forced out of their homes in the winter of 1846. Their prophet had been killed, and they had been driven from the city that they built on the banks of the Mississippi, Nauvoo. And they hoped to eventually find a new home in the American West, but circumstances forced them to stop here at a place they named winter quarters. And it was in this place that the Latter-day Saints would undergo one of the most severe periods of testing in their whole history. I want to tell you about one of the most tragic events in the history of the church. It's a story that admittedly not many members know about, but it involves the most deaths the saints have ever dealt with. 1 in 12 died, hundreds of men, women, and many children. We begin by flying from Salt Lake City to the city of Omaha, Nebraska. So we just arrived in Omaha, and Omaha actually wasn't here when the saints first arrived. It's built up a couple years after the saints have left the area. When the saints first arrive here, there's nothing. Omaha itself is named after some of the local indigenous people, the Omaha tribe, and it's settled, it starts after the saints have left in 1852. In 1856, Omaha starts out as a settlement and then later on grows into a city as it becomes a hub for the Union Pacific Railroad. Then in the 20th century, a lot of other industries are added. Omaha becomes a hub for banking, for insurance. But when the saints get here, this isn't even part of the United States. This is unorganized Indian territory. I want to take you to a spot that will help you visualize what the saints would have seen when they first arrived here in the winter of 1846. So when the saints make their way across Iowa, it's one of the wettest springs on record. They find themselves delayed again and again and again. And then they come up against the natural barrier you can see here of the Missouri River. It took a lot of time and a lot of effort to ferry everyone across the river. There were almost 1,800 wagons, and by the time they'd made it to the other side, it just wasn't possible for even an advance group to make it to the west and back in time. So they were left with no choice but to stay here on the edge of a freezing river as the weather was getting colder and colder, but to build a place to stay and weather out the winter months. We make our way to North Omaha, to the neighborhood of Florence. Here you'll find many traces of the first Latter-day Saint settlers. Anything from Mormon Bridge, extending over the Missouri River, to Mormon Bridge Road, to the Mormon Bridge Plaza. We're going next to the Mormon Trail Center, a museum nestled next to the Mormon Pioneer Cemetery and the Winter Quarters Temple. I'm here at the Pioneer Cemetery in the Florence neighborhood of Omaha, Nebraska. This is a place of death and tragedy, and you'll notice in the art installations two themes. One, death, but the other, resurrection and triumph through Jesus Christ. We're going to go inside and explore for a few moments. Nearly 1 in 12 of every Latter-day Saints that lived at winter quarters would die during that winter. And when a person passed away, their body would usually be brought up the hill to this little cemetery that the saints had established. The pioneers had so few resources at the time, they couldn't do much more than put a little wood marker, and time and weather caused most of those to go away. But all around us, this has been turned into a beautiful little park. And over to the side, you'll see a majestic temple, the Winter Quarters, Nebraska Temple. So as we walk up, we'll see this beautiful statue designed by the sculptor Avard Fairbanks, along with a plaque that lists the people that are buried here. If you look closely at the names, you're going to see that the ages range from 90 to 1 day. But A quick glance down shows that most of the people that died here were just children. They were sometimes just several months old. And in the middle is a figure of Jesus Christ being resurrected with the words, "Life is eternal." All around the statue are quotes from the scriptures or from literature that talk about the enduring immortality of the Spirit, and that through Jesus Christ, it's possible for us to be resurrected and live with our loved ones again. So the statue itself, which is one of the most famous statues ever sculpted by a Latter-day Saint, shows a father and a mother wrapped up in a blanket together, probably in the middle of a bad windstorm, and at their feet is an infant child that they've just laid down in the grave. As you go around the back, you'll see that the sculptor added in a few other features, like a branch encroaching on them, representing adversity and trial. But the lines of the sculpture point upward, and the movement of the sculpture is forward, indicating that even though they had suffered this tremendous loss, they weren't giving up. They were going to continue to move forward and find a new place for themselves and their family. I head just across the street from the cemetery to the Mormon Trail Center Museum. I'm here to meet an expert on Latter-day Saint history, Richard Bennett. Richard is going to give us more details about this important location.
Hi,
Hello.
Casey.
How are you?
Long time no see. Welcome to the only true church history site.
Well, thanks for having us. We've just come here to learn about winter quarters, so walk us through and tell us the story. Currently, the museum is set up in different sections, and as you progress from room to room, you can visualize the story of the saints leaving Nauvoo to winter quarters and then to Utah. Richard takes me to the first room, to how this tragedy begins.
But the death of the prophet Joseph Smith in 1844 in Carthage, Illinois, both Joseph and Hyrum, their death was a fire bell, as I said in the night, that there's no future for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in America. Not in Illinois, not in Ohio, not in Missouri, you name it. This church, to survive, has to leave, or else there's going to be blood in the streets of Nauvoo. Nauvoo will become a battle zone, and it eventually does, in the Battle of Nauvoo in September of 46.
Fearing for the lives of the saints, church leaders start considering plans of fleeing Nauvoo to a safer location.
They want to go to a place where they can settle maybe 1 million people. We now know from the papers they were thinking of growing that fast. 1 million people in some valley that would be protected, a refuge place, not on the coasts, in the interior valleys of the West. They're going to be very careful not to mention that for fear of being intercepted by enemies of the church, possibly the United States Army.
Right.
Because the Mormons are on the move, and whose side are you on? And so they're keeping it pretty close to the vest.
With determination to set out west to flee persecution, the saints now had the daunting task of figuring out how to safely move everyone.
This is not just a nice little trip out in the West to see how things look. This exodus is going to be a matter of life and death for an awful lot of people. And the whole future of the church depends upon finding the right place and surviving. This is going to be men, women, children, sick, infirm, aged, pregnant, the whole people. Nothing like it in American history that I know of.
This was a mass migration, an exodus of an entire people. Thousands were to leave the beautiful city they built, the city of Nauvoo. With the temple, they put their whole souls into building.
Then we come to this painting by John Fairbanks showing the exodus from Nauvoo. Why are they leaving in the wintertime? The primary reason they're leaving in the wintertime is because they're being forced out. And Brigham Young, recognizing that the writing is on the wall, deliberately has the saints beginning to leave at that day. This is about 2,500 saints are coming out here. And what Brigham Young is doing here is buying time. He's showing to the enemies of the church, we are going to leave in the worst possible moment. And even most bitter enemies of the church said, that is the worst possible time that you can leave. And Brigham Young says, we'd rather leave in the winter and take our chances in the winter in Iowa than be killed in the streets of Nauvoo. This is a down payment, as I said, on the Exodus, buys us a time. The mobs back off for a while. It was a strategic move to do that early.
And the mob see them leaving and say, "Oh,
And
we're
can't
not going to
hardly
have to do
believe
anything.
that you're
They're
going to do
leave."
that because you're going to starve out there.
And so thousands of saints left Nauvoo in the dead of winter, with many more thousands following that spring and fall. These early saints would face some of the most treacherous conditions during that first part of their journey through Iowa. And what are some of the things that made it so difficult?
Well, look behind you. You led right into that. Slogging across Iowa. Can you see what's happening here? This is right in the middle of Iowa.
Yeah, the wagons sunk in the mud. They're pulling themselves out. It's a challenging scene.
What's happening is that it's raining every day. We now know it was one of the wettest springs on record. And here they are stuck up to their axles in mud. And now some are questioning the whole thing. Whose side is God on anyway? We lost our homes, we lost our temple, some have lost their lives, and now we're stuck in the middle of this.
It was in the middle of this mess, under the most trying of circumstances, where William Clayton composed the words to the hymn, "Come, Come, Ye Saints," inspired at the news of the birth of his son. It was also during this time the war broke out between the United States and Mexico, and U.S. representatives approached the leadership of the church to ask for their support.
And they invite the church to consider 500 men to march all the way to California to support America's claim for Mexico in the Mexican War. What do you think the initial reaction was amongst those saints?
I would guess not very positive.
Why?
They're trying to leave America, right?
The feeling was one of indignation. Where were you when we were driven out of our homes in Missouri and in Ohio and most recently in Nauvoo? Now you want 500 of our best men to leave their wives in the middle of this mud hole of Iowa? Are you kidding?
Right.
So at first we flatly refused. I think it's a natural response, don't you think?
I would have, but...
So Brigham Young prays and thinks about it, knowing that this is what they needed, and is convinced that this is legitimate, and will do all that he can to persuade 500 men in his companies to join in. He can't order them to do it. How do you think the wise responded? With all their kids.
Yeah.
You want what? You want to give up my husband or my father, whatever it is, and you're going to leave us here in the mud holes of Iowa?
With great sacrifice, 500 men volunteered to join the army. This act builds trust with the United States and provides intel to the routes to the West. But they were asked to leave their families and friends during the direst of circumstances.
So here's the predicament the saints are in. Why can't they go east? Because they were driven out.
Right back into the hands of the mob.
You can't go back east. Why can't they go south to Missouri?
Enemy territory.
Bogs, the extermination order. They can't go north because of the Sioux Indians, and there's 17,000 warriors up north in the Dakotas today. So what's our option?
Where they're at.
This is the option. We have no choice but to beg the Indians, can we stay in your land for 2 years? 2 years will give them a time to be able to make something of this place. Frankly, we're at the mercy of the Omaha Indian. And we may not even survive the first year. I mean, look at how many hospitals and schools and Safeways there are over here. I mean, there's nothing here. This is the whole church on the hoof going west. And are we going to survive or not? This is why winter quarters is of such vast importance, because the whole future of the church hinges on the success of winter quarters.
To further complicate things, the saints had the Missouri River to cross, which quickly became impossible. So Brigham told everyone to find any suitable location nearby to settle. Winter quarters was a large area with a main hub, but over 80 settlements spread throughout the land. So how many are there at the main settlement?
There are going to be almost 4,000 here at winter quarters. And here's a diorama of winter quarters, Nebraska's first city. Well, it wasn't even Nebraska. This is Indian territory, but it's Nebraska's first city, if you will. What are we going to do? How are we going to survive? Because it's late November of 46. And so now here, in this painting, Rome wasn't built in a day, but winter quarters almost was. Because remember, they get here in November, they start building. You know how many cabins they build in just a matter of weeks?
Oh, I can't imagine.
Guess, 50, 100, or 538.
538. My God.
That's about how many they're going to build of these cabins. Some of them are living in dugouts. See those?
Mm-hmm.
Some of them are living in wagons. Some of them are going to be in tents. But can you see what's happening here, Casey?
Yeah, they're carrying out a body.
1 in 12 are going to die in the winter of 46 and 47. Never before, never since in the history of the church were so many dying at once. This is a critical moment of whether the church is even going to survive. Can you guess what they're dying of?
Cholera would be my guess.
Cholera, somewhat later on, will be a great killer. You're right about that. But at this particular time, there's another disease that's carrying them off by the hundreds.
Malaria?
Scurvy,
Scurvy.
which is a deficiency of vitamins, fruits, vegetables. They had plenty of meat. They had thousands of heads of cattle. It wasn't that they were necessarily starving to death. It was that they didn't have enough vitamins, things that would survive, help them survive. And here they are. They can't bury their dead fast enough. But there are other reasons they're dying. Can you think of the other reasons besides disease?
A cold.
Cold, exactly. Look how cold it is. After January, it's below zero for weeks. Below zero, not just below freezing, below zero. And look at the accommodations that they're in. And the exposure, pneumonia, and also they're dying of exhaustion. Crossing Iowa was one arduous, terrifying thing, and they're exhausted. It's a question of survival again. The whole thing that we've been talking about since we left Nauvoo is survival. Will the church make it, or will we be blown, as Brigham Young said, to the seven winds? But this is the place where the great price is paid. This is the place where so many hundreds are going to die. This is the place where faith and future combine. Will we even make it? It's going to be this place that's going to be the great moment in the history of the church. Will we go down or not? And the price that's going to be paid will be in the lives of hundreds. So this is the place of faith, winter quarters.
Richard then takes me into a special room with large windows and a view of the cemetery where many saints were buried. Here you'll find the last remaining headstone and the original model by Fairbanks to the larger statue we saw in the cemetery. Richard then takes me to a heartbreaking art piece.
Can you see the tragedy here?
Right, they're burying a child, little grave.
But look more carefully. How many are being buried?
Oh, I guess you can see shadows.
Yeah. Now here's another family. And maybe another family. And maybe another family. You start looking at it. Wow. Like I said earlier, never before, never since in the history of the church were so many paying that price. Which is why we have here their hope in the gospel of Jesus Christ. Because why did they stay? Why didn't they just turn around and forget all this? Why in the name of heaven, why didn't they just quit? Was it for gold? If it was going for gold, they never would have lasted this far. Was it for property? No. It has to be that faith. And that's the triumph of winter quarters, that they were able to triumph over all of this and move on.
And triumph they did. Through the worst circumstances imaginable, they persevered through it all due to their faith that this was Christ's church. And to help them in their trials, the Lord provided them with an inspired revelation.
In that exhibit is an actual copy of one of the most important documents in the history of the church. Today it's called Section 136 of the Doctrine and Covenants. It's the only canonized revelation of Brigham Young. I've discovered that most saints who come through in these tours know nothing about this. You ask them that, the average Latter-day Saint, about Section 136, and they have not a clue what you're talking about.
This revelation called for the saints to organize themselves for the trek west, to care for the poor, the widows, and the fatherless, to consecrate themselves to this exodus with a covenant, and to follow the 12 apostles. Thy brethren have rejected you and your testimony, even the nation that has driven you out. Go thy way, and do as I have told you, and fear not thine enemies, for they shall not have power to stop my work. For they killed the prophets, and them that are sent unto them, and they have shed innocent blood, which crieth from the ground against them. I am he who led the children of Israel out of the land of Egypt, and my arm is stretched out in the last days to save my people Israel. And let my servants that have been appointed go and teach this, my will, to the saints, that they may be ready to go to a land of peace.
Unanimously agreed and will receive a tremendous support from the membership of the church because we're still on the Lord's errand. Even though we've been driven out and we've had nothing but problems and people have been dying left and right, we're still the Lord's people.
To better show the faith and hope that these saints had as the Lord's people, Richard takes me to a scenic location, across the river and up a tall hill. So where are we now?
Casey, this is the Missouri River Valley, stretching all the way up here. But as you can see, this is the most panoramic view that you're going to get of the Missouri River Valley here. And the saints, when they first got here and they crossed the Missouri River, is still in the hopes of perhaps making that final dash to the Rockies. They hadn't totally given that up yet. And finally, that was when they, in large measure, gave up the whole idea of going further west. And so now where are we going to settle? And so they came north, right through present-day Omaha, and you see Omaha in the distance over there, and finally settled what then was winter quarters, today Florence, Nebraska.
So what do you think is the lesson, most important lesson to take away from winter quarters?
Well, there are so many stories, but you'd have to say that it was the faith of the pioneers. Here they're coming to an area totally unknown, untracked wilderness, on their way to somewhere, and they don't even know where that's going to be. And here at winter quarters is where they're going to be paying this terrific price in terms of death and sickness. And still, the great majority of the saints, they're going to remain faithful to the leadership of the church, to Brigham Young.
It was here where Brigham Young was quoted as saying, "We are willing to take our full share of troubles, trials, losses, and crosses, hardships and fatigues, life or death. In the name of Israel's God, we mean to conquer or die trying."
This is the place of faith and the place of hope and the place of courage and the place of moving ahead. And I think the great message is never give up. Never give up. With the Spirit of the Lord, you can handle whatever it is, no matter how many miles it's going to be. You can do this.
Have faith and keep moving forward. I thank Richard for showing us around winter quarters and the message of hope and faith in our darkest trials. I make one final stop to a location symbolizing the faith and hope of the Latter-day Saints. In 2001, a beautiful temple was dedicated here at Winter Quarters, Nebraska. This temple was built right next door to the cemetery as a memorial to those who gave their lives here and as a tribute towards the sacrifices that they made. And Winter Quarters reminds us all that in our darkest moments, the Savior will speak to us. He'll give us guidance and help. He'll help us know where we're headed to and how to get there. And in those dark moments, if we reach out to God, we'll find out that He knows who we are, what we're going through, and how to best help us.